Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Marvel's Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales on PS5. I was always a Marvel Comics fan as opposed to DC. Nothing wrong with DC, but I preferred the street-level and stranger heroes and villains Marvel created rather than the minor gods and rich playboys beating up thugs as a kink. Yet, of the many heroes Marvel created, the subject for today was not among my favorites, unlike the X-Men, the Punisher, Moon Knight, and others. Yet this game changed my opinion on one of Marvel's longest-running superstars. It made me a Spider fan, sort of. And today, I'm doing a twofer. Let's discuss 2018's Marvel's Spider-Man and its spin-off game, 2020's Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. My interest in comics wasn't simply as a fan of the medium, because by Christ, I ate nothing but shit for it in the 90s when I was a teenager, before the stuff was publicly cool. I wanted to make the damn things. I was enthralled by the worlds, characters, and stories they created. Yeah, as hammy as many of them were. Not every issue can get written by Chris Claremont, unfortunately. I wanted to draw them, too, to help visualize those worlds so that fans could find them enthralling as well. Well, long story short, that didn't happen. Turns out I wasn't good enough as an artist for those lofty goals, and I learned that from DC directly. Somewhat ironic, I guess. So I called it quits and closed that door, and my love for comics and the industry waned. And for a long time, my love for drawing and creating in a visual medium waned too. Yeah, I'm sure you out there listening don't give a shit. That's fine, you can go fuck off and die. But one of the casualties of it was a loss of interest in superhero games. Yeah, I played and enjoyed the Punisher game when that came out in the mid-2000s, where Thomas Jane voiced the main character, even if age has not been kind to that PS2 title. And yeah, I played, enjoyed, and talked a bit about the Arkham trilogy of Batman games in the late 2000s. But those were aberrations, blips on the radar. I was over superheroes and their ilk. Burnout, I suppose. I guess that concept is hard to explain to fans who either had some success in their fandom or who just stayed around for the love of the medium. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. But originally, this game set was not on my personal radar for games. Not a lot are these days. I wonder from time to time if it's just my taste changing or not much in games actually is exciting for me like it used to be. But regardless, it wasn't until I began to hear about this game that it was cool, a good long after its initial public run and release, that I began to think about it. That and a good friend of mine is a big Spider fan and really liked this game. So I figured, what the hell, I'll get a copy. And I did, of the Miles Morales spin-off. Luckily, the edition I got came with a digital code for a copy of the updated version of Marvel's Spider-Man, where they reworked the character model to resemble Tom Holland. So I grabbed that to try and play them in order. And that is why I'm reviewing them together, in my own unique way, of course. There's a lot to cover, so let's dive in. The plot of Marvel's Spider-Man was hammered together out of a number of famous Spider-Man comic book stories, and thankfully developer Insomniac Games dispensed with the biggest one right away. How our hero Peter Parker got his powers. If you have been alive on Earth for more than 5 minutes, then we all goddamn fucking know by now the story of a nerdy science-loving, 98-pound weakling New York high school photography student getting bit by a radioactive spider, and instead of getting mildly sick and maybe developing cancer in 40 years, instead gain the relative strength of a spider, with none of the drawbacks. In the same universe, where another scientist turns into a big green herdy man who bends Abrams tanks in half when he gets mad, this shit tracks. So, what we do launch into is an already fully formed Spider-Man, with combat experience and a list of supervillains under his belt, in the midst of an all-out assault on the main property and tower owned by the villain known as Kingpin, aka Wilson Fisk. where we are treated to the Olympian perfection that is Spider-Man's combat style, which is a combination of extreme gymnastic skill and some kind of capoeira-like martial art. He will fly across the screen at a speed I have yet to see matched in another type of superhero game, and much of this early stage is learning how to maneuver as the wall crawler. Between the web slinging, baffling enemies with well-placed web shots, fighting with speed and agility and precision strikes as opposed to brute strength, and the slow time effect, as not quite quick time events play out mid-combat like tiny cutscenes in the middle of action set pieces. This is where we also have our first boss fight against the Kingpin, a massively round man who is 3 to 4 times Peter's size, and who is largely invulnerable, a situation that is far more common in the Marvel Universe than you would believe, in which we must utilize Pete's fighting skill and his gadgets to outthink and overpower Fisk, which a lot of cinematic bullet time shattering of glass and office furnishings as both Peter and Fisk throw each other through said objects. But Spider-Man prevails and Fisk is arrested. And our good citizen Spider-Man goes back to his 9-to-5 job as a scientific research assistant for Dr. Otto Octavius. And if you know anything about the Spider-Man storyline, you already know where this is going. But these are really only the opening events of this game. Once in jail, a gang called the Inner Demons is seizing Fisk's assets, looking for Devil's Breath, a biological weapon Fisk had that the leader of their gang wishes to use against the people of New York. But this is not all. Norman Osborn, temporary former leader of the scientific firm Oscorp, is mayor of New York, but is still trying to muscle out his rivals, one of whom is Octavius. Octavius is researching his new brainwave-controlled multi-limbed exosuit, as he has developed a degenerative nerve disease that will paralyze him in a few years. And Devil's Breath is one of the accidental creations of Oscorp, and while Norman did fund Otto, he pulls the funding to get Otto and Peter to work for him. If you didn't know, in the main Marvel canon, Norman Osborn is one of Spider-Man's oldest enemies, under the guise of the Green Goblin. Not so here, as this is an alternate timeline. A man named Martin Lee is the leader of the Inner Demons, but Martin has his own secrets. He is the leader and public face of Feast, a shelter organization who helps feed the homeless of New York, helps them get jobs and housing, and is an all-around Good Samaritan organization. And Spider-Man's fabled Aunt May works for them as one of their highest-ranking organization members. As we have jumped ahead in the Spider-Man lore, we have bypassed the part where Spider-Man's Uncle Ben, May's husband, was killed because Peter let a thief go who killed his uncle. Which is good because we've heard this story too much too. Additionally, when Spider-Man took down Fisk, he was aided by a New York City police officer named Jefferson Davis, who was lauded for his heroics by the mayor. All these storylines are about to collide mid-game while Peter goes from patrol point to patrol point across a lovingly rendered model of New York City, which has been littered with additional buildings fitting the Marvel Universe, such as Avengers Tower and the Wakandan Embassy. Anyway, the mid-game, as I was saying. Martin Lee wants Mayor Osborn to submit to his will, and threatens to unleash Devil's Breath across the city. At a mayoral event to honor the heroics of Officer Davis, Lee attacks, unleashing his negative energy-using persona with a photo-negative appearance called Mr. Negative. But he is thwarted by Spider-Man and Officer Davis again. However, it is at the cost of Davis's life, as Davis defends Mayor Osborn. Spider-Man, in his normal guise as Peter Parker, takes Officer Davis' son, Miles Morales, under his wing. Meanwhile, Lee is incarcerated in the nearby super prison called the Raft. Also during this time, Octavius has been obsessing over expanding the abilities of this exosuit, and despite Peter's warning that it may screw his brain harder than a $1,000 hooker, he attaches the damn thing to himself and, predictably, goes crazy. A bit after this, there is a breakout at the Raft, and some of Spider-Man's worst villains, including such long-running series stalwart villains as the Rhino, the Vulture, Electro, and Lee himself, and the villains gang up on Spider-Man, beating him up and presenting him to Octavius, now styling himself Dr. Octopus, who warns Parker/Spider-Man not to interfere as Doc Ock goes to take the recovered sample of Devil's Breath to unleash upon New York as revenge against Mayor Osborn, which he does. The city falls apart as Octavius' supervillain team attacks the city, and the mayor brands Spider-Man a fugitive and responsible for this whole mess. Spider-Man quickly defeats each one of his arch-rival bad guys, and Mary Jane, Peter's long-suffering girlfriend, breaks into Osborn's penthouse, only to learn that Devil's Breath was meant to cure Norman's dying son Harry Osborn, and that Martin Lee was one of the child test subjects that Osborn used illegally, because there's no way to make that shit legal. And an explosion at the lab killed these parents and gave him the Mr. Negative powers, and that there is a cure for the disease. Fuck, this is convoluted. With this information, Spider-Man finds and confronts Lee/Mr. Negative and defeats him, only to have Dr. Octopus arrive and attack and all but destroy Spider-Man. While Parker is recovering, another radioactive spider gets loose and bites Miles Morales, a spider that got onto Mary Jane as she was at Osborn's penthouse. Wow, this keeps going, doesn't it? Badly wounded, but the city is in trouble, Peter uses his super science to build a suit capable of fighting Doc Ock and keeping himself going long enough to do it. He scales Oscorp Tower to rescue Mayor Osborn, and in the process, Doc Ock reveals that he knows Spider-Man is Peter Parker, his former lab assistant, and the two fight, with Spider-Man winning and Octavius getting arrested and put in the raft. You know, the place the supervillains just broke out from. Makes sense. With the Devil's Breath cure in hand, he has to choose whether to save dear old Aunt May, who is dying of the stuff, or make the cure for all of New York. Peter chooses to save everyone. So somehow the cure doesn't work for May, despite it being good enough for all, I guess. And Aunt May reveals in her dying moments she knew Peter was Spider-Man as well, and is proud of him. Look, this is not the first time Aunt May has died in the comics, or movies, or games. It's kind of like Peter's hallmark. Everyone close to him dies due to his Spider-Man persona. 3 months later, Miles reveals to Peter that he too has spider powers, although not exactly the same kind, as we'll soon see, and they both reveal each other's abilities. Mayor Osborn resigns as mayor in disgrace and goes back to his penthouse, where it is shown that Norman's son Harry is in a hidden life support tank, encapsulated in a living black gunk of unknown origin that means Harry will become the villainous monster Venom in the sequel, which, spoiler, happened. And that's just what happened in the Peter Parker side of things. Now let's move on to the Miles Morales spin-off side. Our second and brand new on the job as Justice Crusader Spider-Man, young Miles Morales, is the son of the former NYPD officer Jefferson Davis and Rio Morales, who is running for the seat on the city council to better protect the borough of Harlem, who we saw briefly in the previous game. It is important to note that Miles is of mixed heritage, half black and Hispanic, the foil to Peter's fully white dudedness, and representing the other half of the community of New York City. So the lad has to pull double duty as both Spider-Man and as representing two communities, which is very much part of his character. Well, at least in this time, Peter has been giving Miles plenty of spider tips on how to be a superhero, because he'll need it as Peter and Mary Jane go abroad to solve a different mystery in the made-up bullshit of the Marvel Universe. Here in Harlem, a war is brewing between the dangerous Rexon Energy Corporation and some new underground vigilante thugs who hate Rexon and are led by the Trickster. But there's more to it than that. We begin with a fight between Miles and Peter versus the supervillain Rhino, who Miles accidentally released while on the way to the reconstructed Raft prison. And Peter gets knocked out, so Miles defeats Rhino using one of Miles' unique powers, and electricity power named Venom. Note, not the same as the bad guy of the same name. And his temporary invisibility power, showing his growth in the past year under the original Spider-Man's training. With Peter going abroad with Mary Jane to cover the Civil War in another country that doesn't exist in the real world, Miles must defend all of New York during Christmas time. They have to leave Rhino in the hands of the CEO of Rexon Corporation for some goddamn reason, rather than a vested legal authority, like, I don't know, the cops. And Miles goes back to his high school life. Later on in time, Miles is investigating a break-in at the energy company, who is trying to revitalize Harlem when he runs into a gang called the Underground, who is stealing the energy company's superfuel, New Form. He stops them, then comes home to celebrate Christmas dinner with his mom Rio and his best friend, a tech wizard Genki. Genki invited an old friend of theirs, Finn, who Miles hasn't seen in months, to the party. The next day, Genki makes the Spider-Man app to allow easy access to him in real time to answer calls for help. Miles then uses this almost immediately to get in contact with his estranged uncle Aaron Davis, who had a falling out with his brother Jefferson years ago, and he immediately reveals to this uncle that he is Spider-Man. Why? Fuck if I know. Maybe they explain why in the comics. Anyway, a bit more time goes by and Miles witnesses a fight between the Underground and the Rexon Corporation at one of Rio's campaign events in front of their corporate center, where the Underground steals a truck full of New Form. Miles chases them down across a bridge, where during the fight it is revealed that Finn is the trickster, but that Miles' venom power causes New Form to explode, and it detonates the bridge, damaging his public image. Genki tells Miles that he has to be better, and they montage developing a new suit and identity separate from Peter Parker. Miles continues to investigate Finn and finds that Finn's older brother Rick invented New Form for Rexon, but that Rick got sick from all the stuff and tried to expose the CEO, Simon Krieger. But Krieger killed Rick and took credit for the New Form's invention. Very convoluted. Getting even more convoluted, Uncle Aaron was keeping secrets too, and reveals to Miles that he is in fact the Prowler, a great New York cat burglar, and the reason he was estranged from his policeman brother. He helps Miles infiltrate Rexon to retrieve Finn's phone with all the evidence on it, but the phone gets destroyed. Aaron recommends Miles use his friendship with Finn to see what the Underground is up to. Does so, and finds a lot of the tech the Underground uses was developed by Finn for the purpose of destroying Rexon. Having to reveal his spider identity, Finn turns her wrath on Miles, but the two of them are attacked by Rhino, who has been enhanced by Rexon. But Miles stops Finn from killing the supervillain because that's not what heroes do, and she knocks Miles out. Genki gets Miles home, his mom discovers his secret identity, Uncle Aaron, it turns out, was spying on Finn and Miles for Rexon and captures him to keep him from dying like his father. Miles makes a big hero speech about not turning his back on people in need, which changes Aaron's mind, and Aaron has Rio get word to Harlem to evacuate, as Miles suits back up to head to the fucking reactor Rexon built in Harlem, and Krieger sets to explode should Finn's plan work. Because somehow this shitty tech dude bro was playing 4D chess and planned to let Finn as the trickster destroy his masterwork and annihilate one of the 5 boroughs. Unable to talk her down, Miles and Finn fight and he attempts to suck up as much New Form as he can to keep the reactor from blowing. But this is too much, and Finn flies Miles to a safe distance to discharge the energy, which he does, and she dies in the process. Miles falls back to Earth and is recognized by a few people who he helped along the way, who decide to keep his identity as Spider-Man's secret. And he is hailed publicly as a hero. Peter comes home and praises Miles for all that he did, and end credits. Much like Marvel movies, there are a few end credits reveals that show Norman Osborn telling a doctor, this doctor being the man who becomes the Lizard, another great Spider-Man villain, to release Harry from his containment despite the unstable carnivorous alien life form covering him, further revealing the plot of the, well, fucking spoilers, I guess, now well-known sequel. Wow, that was a lot. I'll give Insomniac writers credit. This plot over the course of these 2 games has certainly mimicked the convoluted nature of the large mainstream comic book writing, especially considering they were cribbing notes from a lot of the lines of both the original Spider-Man and his new protege. So what did all the critics think of this? Critics at large, and if they are at large, then he should be arrested, gave very good review scores to both Marvel's Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales, with Miles Morales receiving slightly less positive reviews. Perhaps out of similarity to the previous game, or superhero fatigue, or because of somewhat lesser quality story, I don't really give a shit. Either way, they praise the stories, the open world environments, the ease and fluidity of the combat, the traversal mechanics, and just about anything else you can think of. Many cited it alongside Batman Arkham Asylum as one of the best superhero licensed games ever made, and that it, according to outlet Game Informer, is, quote, raises the bar for one of the world's most beloved heroes, end quote. Yes, fine, I will agree with you. It certainly is one of the best licensed games ever made. And I wasn't even a fan when I started. Sales on Marvel's Spider-Man were over 3.3 million in its first 3 days of release alone, overtaking Sony's own God of War remake and quickly becoming one of the fastest-selling titles in Sony or gaming history of all time. Some of you may be wondering where or how I'm going to shit on that. I can't really, at least not effectively. I'm sure whatever I might have to say as a lowly podcaster would make the Sony executives dry their tears with all their $100 bills. So instead, I'll just go on my own overall thoughts on both games. I would go into the development history here, but even this Wikipedia article, the most reliable and citable of sources, that I'm using to refresh my memory is a fucking shit hemorrhage of a migraine-inducing nightmare, so I'll say this. Insomniac had just released Sunset Overdrive as an Xbox exclusive, wanted to do a superhero game, Sony was willing, everyone couldn't decide on one till they hit on Spider-Man, lots of dudes and dudettes created it, they lovingly recreated New York City because, even as the great Stan Lee once said it, New York itself is also a character in any story set in New York, used a bunch of the decade's worth of Spider-Man plots to frame the overall story, got a bunch of semi-famous actors and voice actors to bring it to life, Insomniac struck absolute fucking gold, and the Sony execs couldn't hide their money-induced erections fast enough. There's your development history. Choke on it. So here's my overall thoughts on the game. Yes, they are both very, very good. The character development is excellent, and I actually enjoyed learning about and utilizing Spider-Man, both as Peter Parker and as Miles Morales. Which is saying a lot, because I always found Peter and his spider alter egos cringe-inducing and frankly insulting throughout his actual history of media. I know Peter Parker is a somewhat self-insert from Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, his original creators, because when you write something, you cannot help but use yourself as reference from time to time, but of observations of teenagers, who can be overdramatic. And the character never sat with me. Plus, how many times in comics has Peter fucked up over and over, killed his Aunt May, or his girlfriends Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy, quipped at opponents, whined about the morality of simply using his immense powers to just beat up opponents instead of outright killing them, as he could easily do that but instead pulls his punches, or just sat atop a tall building looking over the Manhattan skyline like a blue and red Batman. Not really for me. But again, that's what big name comics do. They only sort of tell an overarching plot with an end goal. They are far more interested in monthly sales than finishing a plot and calling it quits. But yes, the writers at Insomniac actually made a Spider-Man enjoyable. I became a fan of this Spider-Man. And keep in mind, the Spider-Man in these games is considered one of the many, many alternate Spider-Folk across the Marvel multiverse. Not the original one made famous in the 1960s. And I feel kind of bad for Miles. I feel like the kid was not really able to become his own character, at least in the game. Instead, they're just retreading Peter's tragic origins and science nerdery and quippiness onto a mixed-race kid to make him more sellable to the core audience, who could be anybody. But it is hard to say, really. A lot of the middle school kids I teach come from Black and Hispanic families and backgrounds, and many of them see both Peter Parker and Miles Morales as heroes to them. Maybe a bit more for Miles, because representation is super important. But these same kids also see Goku from Dragon Ball as a hero, and that comes from a culture not either of their own or my own. So it is something we can all bond over, I guess. I'm just never sure how to feel when a company, not a writer or an artist individually, but a corporate entity like Disney with Marvel Comics in its portfolio, decides to take a well known and beloved character with obvious white representation and make a non white version. As I said, representation is critical, and every child deserves to have a hero who they can see themselves in no matter what. I just feel more than a bit icky when moneyed corporate interests do it. But despite my misgivings, I do think they did pretty well with Miles. So I'm more than happy to have a world where two Spider-Men are working in tandem. If you think I overthought that, well, sorry folks. I work in education, which is highly invested in equality and fair representation, especially when an army of money-hungry civil lawyers is waiting in the wings to deplete entire districts of their strict and less every year state-allocated funds and take a nice fat cut for themselves. Actual justice be damned. That's the nation we live in, folks, where we are worried about dollars over ethics, and that is how shit gets done. If you don't like that, then actually go do something about it, rather than whining and bitching to no one in particular. This is also a hard one for me because Marvel Spider-Man is an open world title, and I don't normally like open world titles. I dropped any Ubisoft game years ago because that's just what they do, along with many others who, once I found out they were open world collectathons or required exploring a vast multi-hour world to traverse setting for minor rewards, then I usually lose interest right away. And sadly, Insomniac does fall into the open world trap with this game. Look, as I said earlier, they lovingly recreated New York City, and it is boring as shit. Yes, even with the unreal elements of the city, it is just too real world for me, and is seen mostly from the industrial rooftops rather than the street level, which is in keeping with the character's world. I play games for the fantastic, for the unreal. Growing up where I did, Manhattan was around 2 hours away, so a really easy trip, one I have made many times. I'm not impressed. The city is too big, too stuffed with redundant and useless humanity, and everything it uses to maintain homeostasis, too callous, too prideful. The place stinks like garbage and human shit and the commingled urine of millions, and is way too full of itself as a people, government, and identity to not have a necessary humbling coming. Or at least I wish it would. Everyone from terrorists to Mother Nature have already tried, and we just keep letting it go on. If you are from New York City, allow me to speak to you in your native language. Go fuck yourself. Anyway, the game world sucks. But the traversal, yes, the traversal elements, that is where it is at. The speed and accuracy with which you can just about literally fly from one end of the game city to the other is beyond impressive and something I have yet to find an equal to. I really did like the genuine superheroes zipping across the landscape with death-defying acrobatics and pinpoint accuracy, and that itself is worth the price of admission. The plot is otherwise what you expect. It is very dramatic, a series of flashy beat-em-up locations and street chases through the concrete canyons, with stops every now and then for a soliloquy or three, and a boss battle with famous characters if you know the comics and movies. It perfectly encapsulates the media upon which it is based. Really, I did enjoy them a lot, but it's hardly life-altering. It is just really well done popcorn chewing fun in 20 or so hour game form. But it got me thinking about comics and stuff. You see, I think I had something wrong all that time ago. Not about comics as a whole, but where my place in them was, or wasn't really. Comics are a great medium, full of all kinds of stories for every type of person. Yeah, many creators got inspired because of all the big names that alpha males made fun of in public and bought copies of in secret, and many women never liked because they saw women in spandex with big tits and hourglass figures, and it didn't represent them, nor were the stories being told representing them. Representation is important after all, and keep in mind I said many, not everyone. But those creators have gone on to tell other stories. Stories with actual arcs that end, rather than go on for decades with characters that never learn or change or never grow up. I think my mistake was shooting for being the former, not the latter. For trying to fit a best-selling formula rather than being myself, and for telling my own form of story. My art doesn't look anything like Jim Lee, or Joe Mad's, or Frank Cho's, or Barry Windsor Smith's, or any of a dozen more I could name. The best compliment I ever got was an old friend saying my style reminded him of 1970s era John Byrne. And I've drawn a lot both from Mitch Bird and James O'Barr as personal inspirations. If you don't know those names, please look them up. You won't be disappointed. I think now that I've been teaching art for the past few years, getting to talk with others who took their shot and didn't quite hit the mark, and seeing kids who are learning to draw for the first time or hoping to use their blossoming skills to make their own mark one day, well, not only is representation important, but one's sense of individuality. Using your own skills to tell your own story, make your own mark in your own way. That's what I should have been shooting for. As long as I'm still above ground, I can still try and shoot for that. And so can anyone out there listening who thinks they have a story to tell. You can still do it, no matter where along life's path you are. You just have to try. Sure, you may not get to see or change the world, but doing that thing is worth far more than not doing it and regretting that you didn't. Yes, it's kind of silly to say Spider-Man, the video game, that came out of nowhere and I enjoyed long after its popularity date had passed, got me thinking in those directions again. But it did help contribute. It wasn't the only thing, but it did help. Hell, this whole show has been an example of just go do the thing whether people are like it or not. See? Told you I'd get to the point eventually. The great crux upon which Spider-Man has turned is that with great power comes great responsibility. Being a teacher, yes, even an art teacher, is a great power that comes with great responsibility. I'm not saying I'm a superhero. Hell, I'm not even a hero. I work a job hated by students and their communities alike for either being oppressors or for being lazy and overpaid government employees. At least in our current volatile political environment, that's the narrative anyway. But I think I can still be my own hero tale teller and show the world around me that you don't have to be the best to make an impact. You just have to be willing to try. At least I'm not required to wear a goofy and ill-fitting spandex outfit to do it. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, Orden Wells, and Mass Lama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out the Deleted Saves podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.